There is a veil that hides the truth, a tapestry woven with interpretations, dogmas, and convenient silences. The story of Christianity, as it has been told, is merely a reflection of a deeper reality, a distorted echo of a teaching that, in its origin, was not limited to blind belief or ecclesiastical structure.
Introduction. There is a quiet revolution happening within the human soul. It is not loud. It does not demand headlines, and yet it is unfolding every day in hearts that are ready to awaken. This awakening is not about joining a movement or converting to a belief system. It is not about rituals or creeds. It is about something far more personal, far more profound, the realization that within each of us lies the potential for divine awareness. This awareness has been called many things throughout history. In some traditions, it is known as enlightenment. In others, self-realization or cosmic consciousness. But in the Western spiritual tradition, especially among those who have grown up with the teachings of Jesus, this inner awakening is often referred to as the Christ consciousness. Now, before we go any further, let's be clear. When we speak of the Christ consciousness, we are not referring to dogma, religious institutions, or even historical debates about who Jesus was or what he did. Instead, we are pointing toward a universal principle, an inner state of being that transcends time, culture, and creed. At its core, the Christ consciousness is the recognition of our inherent unity with the source of all life. It is the understanding that beneath the surface of our individual identities, the names we carry, the roles we play, the stories we tell ourselves, we are expressions of a deeper, unifying intelligence that permeates the universe. This is not a new idea. It echoes through the mystical traditions of the world. The Sufis call it the self beyond the self. The Buddhists speak of Buddha nature. The Hindus describe it as Atman, the inner self that is one with Brahman, the universal spirit, and in Christian mysticism, it is the Christ within, the indwelling presence of divine wisdom and love. So why bring this up now? Because the world needs a new kind of spirituality, one that is not based on fear or exclusion, one that does not require blind obedience or rigid adherence to ancient doctrines. We need a spirituality that honors reason, intuition, and the lived experience of the individual. And at the heart of that spirituality lies the recognition that the divine is not distant or separate. It is not waiting for us in some far-off heaven after death. It is here, now, within us. And when we awaken to it, everything changes. Let's take a moment to consider what this really means. If the Christ consciousness is available to everyone, not just saints or prophets or chosen individuals, then what does that say about the nature of divinity? It suggests that God is not an external judge or lawgiver, but an internal reality, a living presence that can be known directly through inner experience. This is radical, not because it contradicts science or logic, but because it challenges the way religion has often been used as a tool for control, guilt, and division. When you realize that divinity is within you, you no longer need intermediaries, hierarchies, or exclusive claims to truth. You become your own authority. You begin to trust your own inner knowing. But how do we access this inner Christ? How do we cultivate this awareness in our daily lives? The answer lies not in doctrine, but in transformation. The Christ consciousness is not something we believe in. It is something we become. It is a shift in perception, a reorientation of the mind and heart. It is seeing the world through the eyes of compassion, acting from a place of inner peace, and recognizing the sacred in all things. This process of awakening is often gradual. Sometimes it begins with a question: why do I feel disconnected? What is the purpose of my life? Is there more to existence than what I see on the surface? Other times, it begins with suffering, pain, loss, failure. These are often the gateways to deeper understanding. Because when our illusions fall away, when our ego defenses crumble, we are left with the raw truth of who we are. And in that space, the Christ consciousness can arise. This inner transformation is not easy. It requires honesty, courage, and a willingness to look deeply into ourselves. It asks us to confront our fears, release our attachments, and open our hearts to something greater than our limited sense of self. But the reward is immeasurable. When we awaken to the Christ within, we discover that we are not alone. We realize that we are part of a vast, interconnected web of life. We understand that love is not just a feeling, but the very fabric of reality. And perhaps most importantly, we find freedom. Freedom from guilt, from fear, from the need to prove ourselves. Freedom to live authentically, to love unconditionally, and to serve others without expectation. So how do we begin this journey? We start by turning inward, by setting aside time each day to quiet the mind, listen to the heart, and connect with the stillness within. Through meditation, prayer, or simply being present, we create space for the Christ consciousness to emerge. We also begin to change the way we see the world. Instead of viewing others as separate, we recognize the divine spark in everyone we meet. Instead of seeing life as random or meaningless, we begin to perceive the deeper patterns and purpose behind events. And we practice compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves. Because the Christ consciousness is not about perfection. It is about wholeness. It embraces both light and shadow, joy and sorrow, growth and struggle. In the coming chapters, we will explore the deeper metaphysical truths hidden in the teachings of Jesus. We will examine the symbolic meanings of death, resurrection, and rebirth, not as literal events, but as stages in the spiritual evolution of the individual. We will ask difficult questions like why so many churches teach about Christ, but fail to embody his message, and we will uncover the mystical wisdom encoded in the words and actions of the man known as Jesus of Nazareth. But for now, let's rest in this simple truth. The Christ consciousness is not something outside of you. It is not confined to scripture or ritual. It is alive within you right now, waiting to be recognized. You don't need permission to awaken. You don't need to belong to a group or follow someone else's path. All you need is the willingness to look inside, to trust your inner voice, and to allow yourself to grow. Because the spiritual journey is not about reaching a destination. It is about becoming fully alive, fully aware, fully connected to the infinite source of love and wisdom that dwells within. And that, dear listener, is the essence of the Christ consciousness. Chapter 1. Christ consciousness in every human being. There is a quiet revolution happening within the human soul. It is not loud, it does not demand headlines, and yet it is unfolding every day in hearts that are ready to awaken. This awakening is not about joining a movement or converting to a belief system. It is not about rituals or creeds. It is about something far more personal, far more profound. The realization that within each of us lies the potential for divine awareness. This awareness has been called many things throughout history. In some traditions it is known as enlightenment, in others, self-realization or cosmic consciousness. But in the Western spiritual tradition, especially among those who have grown up with the teachings of Jesus, this inner awakening is often referred to as the Christ consciousness. Now, before we go any further, let's be clear. When we speak of the Christ consciousness, We are not referring to dogma, religious institutions, or even historical debates about who Jesus was or what he did. Instead, we are pointing toward a universal principle, an inner state of being that transcends time, culture, and creed. At its core, the Christ consciousness is the recognition of our inherent unity with the source of all life. It is the understanding that beneath the surface of our individual identities, the names we carry, the roles we play, the stories we tell ourselves, we are expressions of a deeper unifying intelligence that permeates the universe. This is not a new idea. It echoes through the mystical traditions of the world. The Sufis call it the self beyond the self. The Buddhists speak of Buddha nature. The Hindus describe it as Atman, the inner self that is one with Brahman, the universal spirit, and in Christian mysticism, it is the Christ within, the indwelling presence of divine wisdom and love. So why bring this up now? Because the world needs a new kind of spirituality, one that is not based on fear or exclusion, one that does not require blind obedience or rigid adherence to ancient doctrines. We need a spirituality that honors reason, intuition, and the lived experience of the individual. And at the heart of that spirituality lies the recognition that the divine is not distant or separate. It is not waiting for us in some far-off heaven after death. It is here, now, within us. And when we awaken to it, everything changes. Let's take a moment to consider what this really means. If the Christ consciousness is available to everyone, not just saints or prophets or chosen individuals, then what does that say about the nature of divinity? It suggests that God is not an external judge or lawgiver, but an internal reality, a living presence that can be known directly through inner experience. This is radical, not because it contradicts science or logic, but because it challenges the way religion has often been used, as a tool for control, guilt, and division. When you realize that divinity is within you, you no longer need intermediaries, hierarchies, or exclusive claims to truth. You become your own authority. You begin to trust your own inner knowing. But how do we access this inner Christ? How do we cultivate this awareness in our daily lives? The answer lies not in doctrine, but in transformation. The Christ consciousness is not something we believe in. It is something we become. It is a shift in perception, a reorientation of the mind and heart. It is seeing the world through the eyes of compassion, acting from a place of inner peace, and recognizing the sacred in all things. This process of awakening is often gradual. Sometimes it begins with a question. Why do I feel disconnected? What is the purpose of my life? Is there more to existence than what I see on the surface? Other times, it begins with suffering, pain, loss, failure. These are often the gateways to deeper understanding. Because when our illusions fall away, when our ego defenses crumble, we are left with the raw truth of who we are. And in that space, the Christ consciousness can arise. This inner transformation is not easy. It requires honesty, courage, and a willingness to look deeply into ourselves. It asks us to confront our fears, release our attachments, and open our hearts to something greater than our limited sense of self. But the reward is immeasurable. When we awaken to the Christ within, we discover that we are not alone. We realize that we are part of a vast, interconnected web of life. We understand that love is not just a feeling, but the very fabric of reality. And perhaps most importantly, we find freedom. Freedom from guilt, from fear, from the need to prove ourselves. Freedom to live authentically, to love unconditionally, and to serve others without expectation. So how do we begin this journey? We start by turning inward. by setting aside time each day to quiet the mind, listen to the heart, and connect with the stillness within. Through meditation, prayer, or simply being present, we create space for the Christ consciousness to emerge. We also begin to change the way we see the world. Instead of viewing others as separate, we recognize the divine spark in everyone we meet. Instead of seeing life as random or meaningless, we begin to perceive the deeper patterns and purpose behind events. And we practice compassion, not just for others, but for ourselves, because the Christ consciousness is not about perfection. It is about wholeness. It embraces both light and shadow, joy and sorrow, growth and struggle. In the coming chapters, we will explore the deeper metaphysical truths hidden in the teachings of Jesus. We will examine the symbolic meanings of death, resurrection, and rebirth, not as literal events, but as stages in the spiritual evolution of the individual. We will ask difficult questions like why so many churches teach about Christ, but fail to embody his message, and we will uncover the mystical wisdom encoded in the words and actions of the man known as Jesus of Nazareth. But for now, let's rest in this simple truth. The Christ consciousness is not something outside of you. It is not confined to scripture or ritual. It is alive within you right now, waiting to be recognized. You don't need permission to awaken. You don't need to belong to a group or follow someone else's path. All you need is the willingness to look inside, to trust your inner voice, and to allow yourself to grow. Because the spiritual journey is not about reaching a destination. It is about becoming fully alive, fully aware, fully connected to the infinite source of love and wisdom that dwells within. And that, dear listener, is the essence of the Christ consciousness. Chapter 2. The Metaphysical Meaning of Death, Resurrection, and Rebirth. When we hear the words death, resurrection, and rebirth, they immediately conjure images from ancient texts, stained glass windows, and Sunday sermons. These are powerful symbols, deeply embedded in the Christian tradition. But their true meaning goes far beyond the historical narrative of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. Metaphysically speaking, these three concepts represent a universal process of inner transformation. They are not just events that happened 2,000 years ago. They are stages in the ongoing evolution of consciousness. They are maps for the journey of awakening that every human being must undertake. Let's break them down. First, death. Not physical death, but the symbolic death of the old self. This is the end of a way of thinking, a way of being that no longer serves us. It is the letting go of limiting beliefs, false identities, and outdated versions of who we think we are. This kind of death is painful. It involves surrender, humility, and the willingness to face our shadows. But it is also necessary. Just as a seed must die to the form of a seed before it can become a tree, we too must die to our former selves if we are to grow into something greater. Then comes resurrection. This is the rising of the new self. It is the emergence of higher awareness, the birth of spiritual insight, the awakening of compassion and wisdom. It is the moment when we realize that we are more than our past conditioning, more than our fears, more than the roles we have played. Resurrection is not passive. It is an active reclaiming of our power. It is choosing to rise above victimhood, above limitation, above the illusion of separation. It is stepping into alignment with the Christ consciousness, the inner presence of divine intelligence and love. Finally, rebirth. This is the integration of the new self into everyday life. It is no longer just a fleeting insight or temporary high. It becomes the foundation of how we live, how we relate, how we see the world. Rebirth is the beginning of a new cycle. It is not the end of the journey, but the start of a deeper phase. Because spiritual growth is not linear, it is spiral. We return to familiar themes again and again, each time with greater understanding, greater depth, greater freedom. So how do these stages show up in real life? They appear in moments of crisis and challenge. When we lose a job, a relationship ends, or we face a health issue. These are invitations to let go of what no longer works. They are opportunities to die to the old ways of thinking and open to new possibilities. They also show up in moments of inspiration and clarity. When we suddenly see things differently, when we feel a deep sense of connection, when we realize that life is not just about survival, but about meaning, purpose, and service. And they reveal themselves in the quiet, consistent choices we make every day. To forgive instead of hold grudges, to give instead of hoard, to love instead of fear. These are the small deaths and resurrections that lead to lasting rebirth. What makes this process so powerful is that it mirrors the natural rhythms of life. Seasons change, day turns to night, seeds die, then bloom. Nothing in nature remains static. Everything evolves. Spiritual growth follows the same pattern. We cannot skip death and expect resurrection. We cannot avoid pain and still experience transformation. There is no shortcut to awakening. But the good news is that we are never truly lost in the darkness. Even in our lowest moments, the light of the Christ consciousness is always present. It may be dimmed, obscured, forgotten, but never gone. And when we finally surrender to the process, when we stop resisting the death of the old and embrace the possibility of the new, something remarkable happens. We remember who we truly are, not the person we thought we were, not the roles we've played, not the labels we've carried, but the eternal, infinite presence that lies at the core of our being. That is the promise of resurrection and rebirth, and it is available to anyone willing to walk the path. Chapter 3. Why do most churches teach about Christ, but not as the Messiah? If you've ever walked into a church, flipped through a Bible, or listened to a sermon, you've probably noticed something interesting. Most churches spend a lot of time talking about Jesus, his birth, his miracles, his parables, his crucifixion and resurrection. But rarely do they emphasize the idea that Jesus was the Messiah in a way that applies directly to the individual. Instead, much of traditional Christianity focuses on Jesus as a savior figure, someone who died for our sins and offers salvation through belief. While this teaching has brought comfort to millions, it also places the emphasis on external salvation rather than internal transformation. So why is that? Why do churches teach about Christ, but not as the Messiah in the deepest, most personal sense? To answer that, we need to understand the difference between institutional religion and authentic spiritual awakening. Churches, by their nature, are organizations. They exist to preserve doctrine, maintain community, and pass on traditions. That's not inherently bad, but it does mean that they often prioritize structure over spontaneity, dogma over direct experience, and conformity over individual exploration. As a result, the image of Christ that emerges is often static, a historical figure, a theological concept, a moral example to follow. He becomes someone we admire, worship, or obey, but not someone we embody. But the original message of Jesus was radically different. He didn't come to establish a religion. He didn't set out to found a church. His mission was not to offer salvation from sin, but to reveal the kingdom of heaven within. That phrase, within, is crucial because it points to the inner dimension of spiritual life. It suggests that the divine is not somewhere else, but right here inside us. And if that's true, then the role of Christ is not just to save us from punishment, but to awaken us to our own divine nature. So where did this shift happen? How did the living message of Jesus get turned into a fixed set of beliefs? It began with the early councils of the Church, which sought to define orthodoxy and eliminate competing interpretations. Over time, the mystical, experiential aspects of Christianity were sidelined in favor of structured theology and institutional authority. The focus shifted from personal transformation to doctrinal correctness, from inner awakening to outer obedience, from the Christ within to the Christ above. This isn't to say that organized religion has no value. For many people, it provides a sense of community, guidance, and moral direction. But for those seeking a deeper spiritual path, the institutional framework often becomes a barrier rather than a bridge. Because when Christ is seen only as a historical figure or divine judge, we miss the most revolutionary truth of all: that the same consciousness that awakened in Jesus is available to each of us. That we too can become messiahs, not in the sense of claiming superiority, but in the sense of embodying divine wisdom, compassion, and healing power. A messiah is not someone who saves others from sin. A messiah is someone who awakens others to their own divinity. And that is a message that threatens every system built on dependence, fear, and control. Which brings us back to the question, why do churches teach about Christ, but not as the Messiah? Because if they taught that, they would be teaching people to look inward for truth, to trust their own experience, to question authority, to live from a place of inner freedom rather than outer compliance. And that doesn't fit well with maintaining power, tradition, or institutional control. So what can we do with this knowledge? We can reclaim the original message of Jesus. We can see him not as the only Son of God, but as a reminder that we are all children of the divine. We can honor his teachings not as rules to follow, but as invitations to awaken. We can become students of the Christ, not just admirers of Jesus, because the true legacy of Christ is not found in cathedrals or creeds. It is found in the hearts of those who dare to look inward, to question, to grow, and to live from the deepest truth they know. And that truth is this: the Christ is not a title, it is not a name, it is not a doctrine, it is a state of being, one that is available to all, right now, inside you. Chapter 4. The Deeper Mystical Truths, encoded in the words and actions of Jesus. When we read the words of Jesus or study his life, most people approach them from a literal or religious perspective. We take parables at face value, see miracles as supernatural events, and interpret teachings through the lens of tradition. But what if there was another way to understand his message, one that goes beyond historical accuracy or doctrinal debate? What if the words and actions of Jesus were not just moral lessons or divine interventions, but encoded metaphysical truths meant to awaken our inner consciousness? This idea is not new. In fact, many early Christian mystics, like Meister Eckhart, Thomas à Kempis, and even the anonymous author of The Cloud of Unknowing, recognized that the deeper meaning of Christ's teachings could only be grasped by those who turned inward. Jesus spoke often in symbols and metaphors. He used nature imagery, paradoxes, and riddles to point to realities that couldn't be explained directly. This was intentional, because spiritual truth cannot be fully contained in words. It must be experienced. Let's begin with one of his most famous statements: "The kingdom of heaven is within you." On the surface, this seems like a poetic expression about finding peace or happiness inside yourself. But metaphysically, it means something far more profound. It suggests that the ultimate reality, the divine presence, the source of all life, is not external or distant. It is not waiting for us after death. It is not found in temples, rituals, or dogma. It is already here now, within your own being. This is radical, because it completely shifts where we look for truth. Instead of searching outside, through belief systems, institutions, or doctrines, we are told to turn inward, to meditate, to reflect, to listen. And that challenges every system built on external authority. Another powerful teaching comes in the form of parables. Jesus didn't give lectures, he told stories. Why? Because stories bypass the intellect and speak directly to the heart and soul. Take the parable of the prodigal son. On the surface, it's about forgiveness and redemption. But metaphysically, it represents the journey of the soul. How we leave the awareness of our divine origin, the Father, squander our inheritance in the world of illusion, the far country, suffer loss, and then return home to reclaim our true identity. Or consider the parable of the sower. Superficially, it talks about different responses to spiritual teachings, but beneath that, it reveals how spiritual truth takes root only when the mind and heart are open, fertile ground. If we are distracted, fearful, or resistant, the seed of truth cannot grow. Even the miracles attributed to Jesus carry deep symbolic meaning. Healing the blind man isn't just about restoring physical sight. It's about awakening spiritual vision. Walking on water isn't about defying gravity. It's about rising above fear and doubt. Feeding the hungry with loaves and fishes isn't a magic trick. It's about recognizing that abundance flows from inner alignment, not material accumulation. Every action, every word, every encounter Jesus had was designed to reveal hidden dimensions of reality, to show us that the physical world is only the surface of a much deeper order. But perhaps the most misunderstood aspect of Jesus' life is his crucifixion and resurrection. Most religious interpretations focus on sacrifice, punishment, and redemption. But from a mystical standpoint, these events represent the universal cycle of transformation. The death of the ego, the surrender to higher truth, and the rebirth into a new state of consciousness. Crucifixion symbolizes the letting go of false identities, attachments, and fears. Resurrection is the realization of eternal life, not in a future heaven, but in the present moment, as an awakened awareness. So why don't we hear these interpretations more often? Because they challenge the structures of organized religion. They invite individuals to become their own spiritual authority. And they require personal growth, not passive belief. If we truly understood the mystical truths behind Jesus' words and actions, we wouldn't need intermediaries to tell us what to believe. We wouldn't need fear-based theology to motivate us. We would recognize that the same power that healed, taught, and transformed in Jesus is available to each of us. That's why Jesus said things like, "The works that I do, shall you do also, and greater works than these shall you do." John 14:12. He wasn't claiming superiority. He was pointing to our shared potential. He didn't come to save us from ourselves. He came to show us who we really are. And that is the deepest mystery of all. Chapter 5. The illusion of separation and the oneness of all life. One of the most profound spiritual truths hidden in the teachings of Christ is the principle of unity. Jesus didn't just teach about love. He lived it. He reached out to those society rejected, forgave without condition, and saw divinity in every person he met. But how did he do that? How could he look past the surface differences, social status, race, gender, even moral behavior, and see the sacred in everyone? Because he understood what so many of us forget. We are not separate beings living isolated lives. We are expressions of one consciousness manifestations of a single divine source. This idea that all life is connected is not unique to Christianity. It appears in nearly every mystical tradition. In Hinduism, it's called Advaita, or non-duality. In Buddhism, it's known as interdependent origination. In Taoism, it's the Tao, the underlying flow that connects all things. And in Christian mysticism, this truth is summed up in the phrase, "I and the Father are one." John 10:30. Jesus wasn't saying he was the only Son of God. He was revealing the deeper reality that all of us are one with the divine. And if we truly understood that, our entire perception of life would change. Let's take a moment to explore what this means. The illusion of separation is one of the most powerful forces shaping human experience. From childhood, we're taught that we are individuals, separate from others, separate from nature, even separate from God. We grow up believing that success depends on competition, that happiness comes through possession, and that identity is defined by roles: parent, child, worker, citizen. But these are all surface identities. They describe what we do, not who we are. Beneath all of that is something far more fundamental: awareness, consciousness, presence. That inner space where thoughts arise, emotions pass through, and experiences unfold. It doesn't belong to any religion, culture, or nation. It is universal. And when we touch that place within ourselves, we begin to recognize it in others. This is why Jesus said, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Mark 12:31. It wasn't just a moral instruction. It was a metaphysical truth. When you see yourself in another person, when you realize that their suffering is your suffering, their joy is your joy, then compassion becomes natural, not forced, not earned, not conditional. But how do we break through the illusion of separation? Through self-awareness, through mindfulness, through the willingness to look beyond appearances and feel the energy that flows beneath them. Try this simple experiment. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath. Let go of your thoughts. Don't try to stop them. Just watch them come and go, like clouds in the sky. Now ask yourself, who am I beyond my name, my job, my history? You might find that the answer isn't something you can put into words, but there's a presence there, a stillness, a knowing. That is the real you. That is the Christ consciousness, and it is not different from the consciousness that animates every other being. When we awaken to this truth, our relationships change. We no longer see others as obstacles or rivals. We no longer fear difference or cling to sameness. We recognize that diversity is part of the divine expression. Just as a tree has many branches, leaves, and roots, yet is one organism, so too are we all part of one living whole. This understanding dissolves hatred. It softens judgment. It brings peace. And it transforms the way we live. Because if we are all connected, then every action matters, every word, every thought, because they ripple outward into the shared field of consciousness. This is not abstract philosophy. It's practical wisdom. Living from the awareness of oneness changes how we treat people, how we care for the planet, how we respond to suffering. So what does this have to do with the teachings of Christ? Everything. Jesus didn't just preach unity. He modeled it. He touched lepers. He ate with sinners. He healed enemies. He welcomed strangers. He lived from the recognition that there is no other, only variations of the same divine essence. And that message is desperately needed today. In a world increasingly divided by politics, religion, ideology, and fear, the call to unity is more important than ever. Not a shallow unity based on conformity, but a deep unity rooted in respect, empathy, and shared purpose. Jesus' mission was not to found a religion. It was to reveal the kingdom of heaven within and between all people. So the next time you feel disconnected, remember, you are never truly alone. You are always part of something greater, always held in the embrace of the one love that created everything. And that love is not waiting for you somewhere else. It is already here, already now, inside you. Chapter 6. The Power of Forgiveness and the Release of Karma. One of the most misunderstood teachings in spiritual life is forgiveness. Many people think of it as a moral obligation, something we do for others to be good or spiritual. But when we look at how Jesus spoke about forgiveness, we see that it was never about weakness, submission, or even just letting go of hurt. Forgiveness, as taught by Christ, is a powerful metaphysical act, one that liberates us from the weight of the past and frees our energy for the present moment. Jesus didn't ask his followers to forgive because he wanted them to be passive. He asked them to forgive because he understood the laws of consciousness, the way thoughts, emotions, and judgments shape reality. Let's start with a simple truth. Holding on to resentment, anger, or blame creates energetic knots in our being. These emotional patterns become like anchors, pulling us into cycles of suffering and repetition. In Eastern traditions, this is often called karma, action, that binds us to future consequences. But forgiveness is not about erasing what happened. It's not pretending that pain didn't exist. It's not excusing harmful behavior. True forgiveness is an internal shift, a decision to no longer allow past events to control your present peace. This is why Jesus said, "If you do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will your Father forgive your trespasses." Matthew 6:15. He wasn't threatening divine punishment. He was revealing a universal law. Whatever we hold on to, we continue to live. Whatever we resist, we reinforce. So how does this work on a deeper level? When we refuse to forgive, we remain identified with the role of victim. And while being a victim may feel justified in the short term, it locks us into a limited identity. It keeps us trapped in stories of betrayal, injustice, and loss. But when we choose to forgive, not for the other person but for ourselves, we reclaim our power. We stop giving away our energy to the past. We begin to heal. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing the emotional charge tied to a memory. It means seeing the situation clearly, without distortion. It means understanding that everyone acts from their own level of awareness, and that includes us. In fact, one of the most radical aspects of Christ's teaching on forgiveness is that it begins with self-forgiveness. Many of us carry deep guilt, not just for things we've done, but for things we believe we should have done. We judge ourselves harshly. We feel unworthy of love, success, or peace. But Jesus never condemned anyone. Not the adulterous woman, not the thief on the cross, not the tax collector, not even those who crucified him. Instead, he offered acceptance, compassion, grace, and in doing so, he modeled the ultimate act of self-forgiveness, recognizing that no matter what we've done, we are still whole, still loved, still capable of transformation. This brings us to another key point. Forgiveness is not a single event. It's a process. Sometimes we need to forgive the same person or the same part of ourselves again and again until the emotional charge finally dissolves. That's okay. Healing takes time. Growth requires patience. But each time we choose forgiveness, we weaken the grip of the past. Each time we let go of judgment, we open space for new possibilities. Each time we release resentment, we create room for peace. And here's the beautiful paradox. When we forgive, we don't change the other person. We change ourselves. We become lighter, freer, more aligned with the Christ consciousness. the state of being where love flows, unimpeded by fear or pain. So what can we take from this? First, understand that forgiveness is not optional. If you want inner freedom, it is essential. Without it, we remain bound to the echoes of old wounds. Second, recognize that forgiveness begins within. You cannot truly forgive others until you forgive yourself, and you cannot offer compassion outwardly until you cultivate it inwardly. Third, practice forgiveness daily, not just for big betrayals, but for small annoyances, misunderstandings, and disappointments. Because every time you choose peace over conflict, you strengthen your spiritual muscles. Finally, remember that forgiveness is not weakness, it is strength. It takes more courage to let go than to hold on. It takes more wisdom to heal than to hate. Jesus knew this. That's why he forgave from the cross. That's why he reached out to sinners. That's why he welcomed the lost. Because he saw beyond appearances. He saw the soul beneath the story. He saw the divine potential waiting to awaken. And so can you. Chapter 7. The Nature of Divine Love and Its Transformative Power. If there is one word that captures the essence of Christ's message, it is love. Not romantic love, not conditional affection, not even just kindness, though those are all expressions of it. The love Jesus spoke of was something deeper, more universal, more powerful. It was divine love, unconditional, unearned, unending. This kind of love does not depend on circumstances. It does not rise or fall with emotions. It is not reserved for a chosen few, or withheld from those who have made mistakes. It is the very nature of the universe, the energy that holds all life together. Jesus didn't just talk about love. He lived it. He loved without limits. He reached out to those society rejected. He forgave without hesitation. He gave freely, expecting nothing in return. And in doing so, he revealed a truth that many still struggle to accept. We are not here to earn love. We are here to express it. Because love is not something we find. It is something we are. Now, this may sound idealistic. After all, we live in a world where love often feels scarce, where people fight over it, manipulate for it, suffer without it. But that is because most people confuse love with attachment, possession, or validation. True love is different. It is not based on need. It is not tied to form. It is not dependent on another person to complete us. It is an inner state, an awareness of unity, of connection, of belonging to something greater than ourselves. So how do we access this kind of love? Not by searching outside ourselves, not by trying harder to be good or kind, not by forcing ourselves to feel what isn't real, but by awakening to the truth of who we are. Because when we recognize that we are not separate beings, when we touch the presence within that is whole, infinite, and eternal, we begin to see love everywhere, not as something we give or receive, but as the very fabric of existence. This is why Jesus said, "Love your enemies," Matthew 5:44. He wasn't asking his followers to ignore injustice or tolerate abuse. He was inviting them to shift their perception, to see beyond the surface of conflict, and recognize the shared humanity beneath every face. That kind of love is not sentimental. It is revolutionary. It dissolves fear. It breaks cycles of hatred. It heals wounds that no medicine can reach. But how do we cultivate it? We begin by turning inward, by learning to love ourselves, not in a narcissistic way, but with compassion, acceptance, and understanding. By recognizing our own worthiness, not because of what we've done or achieved, but simply because we exist. From that place of self-love, we extend outward. We stop seeing others as obstacles or rivals. We stop using people as means to our own ends. We start listening. We start caring. We start showing up. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but with sincerity. And as we do, something remarkable happens. We become channels for divine love, not because we try to be special, but because we allow ourselves to be real. This is the transformation that Jesus modeled. He didn't teach love through words alone. He taught it through presence, through action, through surrender. And that same power is available to each of us, because divine love is not exclusive. It doesn't belong to any religion, tradition, or doctrine. It is the birthright of every human being. And when we open ourselves to it, we become more than we were before. We become healers. We become peacemakers. We become light bearers in a world that often forgets how to shine. So what does this mean for your life? It means that every time you choose love over fear, you align yourself with the highest truth. Every time you offer kindness without expectation, you reflect the Christ consciousness. Every time you forgive instead of hold grudges, you break free from the chains of the past. And every time you look at someone, even someone difficult, with compassion, you awaken the divine within yourself. Because love is not just a feeling. It is the force that created the stars, the energy that breathes life into every cell, the presence that waits patiently within you, ready to transform everything. All you have to do is let it in. Chapter 8. The Inner Kingdom, Living from the Center of Being. Jesus spoke often about the kingdom of heaven. He told parables, gave instructions, and even said that the kingdom was within you. Luke 17:21. But what did he really mean by this? Most people interpret the kingdom of heaven as a place, a paradise after death, where the righteous go to live forever in bliss. That interpretation may bring comfort, but it misses the deeper metaphysical truth. The kingdom of heaven is not a location. It is a state of consciousness, a dimension of being that exists beyond time, beyond form, beyond the illusions of separation and lack. It is the center within you, the still point from which all life flows, the unshakable peace beneath the noise of the world, the eternal presence that remains unchanged by circumstance. This inner kingdom is not something you earn or achieve. It is already yours, always has been, always will be. But most people don't live from there. They live from the surface, reacting to thoughts, emotions, and external conditions. They build their sense of self on shifting ground, success or failure, praise or criticism, love or loss. And when the winds of life blow, they feel unstable. So how do we shift from living on the surface to living from the center? By learning to access the kingdom within, not just occasionally, but consistently. By anchoring ourselves in the awareness of our true nature, regardless of what's happening around us. This doesn't mean ignoring reality. It doesn't mean pretending everything is fine when it isn't. It means seeing clearly, feeling deeply, and responding with wisdom and grace, because you are no longer driven by fear or reaction. Let's explore how Jesus modeled this kind of centered living. He walked into situations of conflict and brought peace. He faced betrayal without hatred. He remained calm in storms. He healed the sick, raised the dead, and fed the hungry, not through magic, but through alignment with the power of the inner kingdom. That power is not his alone. It belongs to all who awaken to it. So what does it take to live from the center? First, awareness. You must recognize that your thoughts and emotions are passing clouds. They are not who you are. Beneath them is a space of pure presence, stillness, knowing. Second, discipline. Like any skill, staying connected to the inner kingdom takes practice. Meditations, prayer, mindful breathing, conscious movement. These are all tools to help you return to your center, again and again. Third, detachment. Not emotional coldness, but freedom from needing outcomes to define your worth. When you stop tying your happiness to results, you become free to act from clarity rather than desperation. Fourth, trust. Trust that when you live from the kingdom within, life supports you. Doors open, guidance comes, resources appear. Because when you align with the highest truth within, the universe conspires to meet you there. Now, let's look at how this plays out in daily life. When someone insults you, instead of reacting in anger, you pause. You check in with yourself. You remember who you are, beyond labels and stories. And from that place, you respond, not out of ego, but out of wisdom. When you face financial hardship, instead of falling into panic, you breathe. You ask, what is the next step? Not, why is this happening to me? You trust that abundance flows from inner alignment, not outer accumulation. When a relationship ends, instead of collapsing into grief, you allow the pain to move through you without identifying with it. You know that your wholeness is not dependent on another person. You remain grounded in the knowledge that you are never truly alone. This is the essence of Christ consciousness, not perfection, not immunity to suffering, but the ability to remain centered in the midst of change. And once you begin to live from this place, something shifts. You no longer seek validation from the outside world. You no longer need others to behave a certain way for you to feel okay. You become less reactive, more responsive, less fearful, more loving, because you have found your home, not in a future heaven, but in the present moment. In the silence between your thoughts, in the breath that moves through your body, in the knowing that you are part of something infinite. And that, dear listener, is the kingdom of heaven, not far away, not waiting for you after death. Here, now, within you. Chapter 9. The Role of the Ego and How to Transcend It. One of the most subtle yet powerful obstacles to spiritual awakening is the ego. This is not the part of us that feels pride or arrogance, though those are expressions of it, but rather the entire structure of our personality that identifies with form, labels, achievements, and stories. The ego is the voice inside that constantly judges, compares, defends, and seeks validation. It tells you who you are based on what you've done, what others say about you, how much money you have, or how attractive you appear. And while this identity may help you navigate the world, it is ultimately an illusion, a temporary mask worn by the eternal self. Jesus understood the ego intimately, not because he was immune to it, but because he saw through it. He didn't deny its presence. He simply refused to identify with it. That's why he said things like, "Whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for my sake will find it." Matthew 16:25. He wasn't talking about literal death. He was pointing to a fundamental truth of spiritual growth. The only way to awaken to your true nature is to let go of the false self, the egoic identity that has been built over years of conditioning. So what exactly is the ego? It is the thought-based sense of self that forms early in life. It develops from your environment, your upbringing, your education, and your experiences. It creates a narrative about who you are, how the world works, and what you must do to survive and be accepted. This narrative becomes so deeply ingrained that most people spend their entire lives identifying with it. They believe they are their thoughts, their emotions, their past mistakes, their future plans. But none of these things are who you really are. You are the awareness behind the thoughts, the observer of the emotions, the space in which all experience arises. And when you begin to see this clearly, something begins to shift. The ego starts to loosen its grip. You no longer take every thought seriously. You stop believing every story your mind tells you. You recognize that fear, doubt, and insecurity are just passing clouds, not the sky itself. But how do we actually transcend the ego? Not by fighting it, not by trying to suppress it. That only gives it more power. Instead, we must understand it, observe it, and gradually disidentify from it. Here's how. 1. Awareness. The first step is simply noticing the voice in your head. Become aware of how often it criticizes, complains, or tries to control situations. Watch how it clings to the past or worries about the future. Just observing it without judgment weakens its hold on you. 2. Presence. Whenever you feel caught up in mental drama, bring yourself back to the present moment. Feel your breath and notice your body. Listen to sounds around you. Grounding yourself in the know dissolves the illusion that the ego is real. 3. Detachment. Stop taking yourself so seriously. Learn to laugh at your own seriousness. Recognize that many of your fears are imagined. Most of your problems are not life-threatening. They're just uncomfortable stories created by the mind. 4. Surrender. Let go of needing to control everything. Accept that you don't have to figure it all out. Trust that when you stop trying so hard to manage life, guidance comes naturally. Surrender doesn't mean giving up. It means opening to a higher intelligence within. 5. Compassion. Don't hate the ego. It was created as a survival mechanism. It protected you when you were young. Now, instead of seeing it as the enemy, treat it like a child who needs love and understanding. When you respond with kindness instead of frustration, the ego begins to soften. Jesus modeled this kind of ego transcendence throughout his life. He remained centered even when falsely accused. He didn't react when insulted. He didn't seek recognition or applause. He gave freely, loved unconditionally, and lived fully without attachment to outcome. That is the mark of someone who has gone beyond ego identification. Now, this doesn't mean the ego disappears entirely. Even the most awakened individuals still have moments of self-concern, irritation, or doubt. But they no longer believe those moments define them. They know who they are beneath the surface. They live from the Christ consciousness, the inner kingdom where peace, wisdom, and love reside. And so can you. Because the ego is not your enemy. It is simply a stage you must pass through on the journey home. Once you stop identifying with it, you are free. Free to live authentically. Free to love unconditionally. Free to walk through life with grace, clarity, and joy. Because you are not your ego. You are the light behind the eyes, the silence beneath the noise, the presence that has always been here. Now, inside you. Chapter 10. The Law of Cause and Effect. Karma and Spiritual Responsibility. At the heart of spiritual growth lies a simple but profound truth. Every action, thought, and intention has consequences. This is not a punishment from an external deity, nor is it fate in the traditional sense. It is the natural law of cause and effect. What many call karma. Karma is not a system of divine justice. It is a universal principle of balance. Every choice you make, every word you speak, every emotion you hold, creates a ripple that returns to you, not necessarily as retribution, but as reflection. Jesus understood this deeply. Though he didn't use the word karma, his teachings are filled with references to how we reap what we sow. He said, "Judge not, that you be not judged," Matthew 7:1. And, "With the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged," Matthew 7:2. These statements were not moral warnings about condemning others. They were metaphysical truths about how consciousness works. What you give out, you receive inwardly. How you treat others, you treat yourself on a subtle level. So what exactly is karma? In its simplest form, karma means action. In Sanskrit, karma refers to the residue left by actions, especially those performed unconsciously or with attachment to outcome. Positive actions create positive results. Negative actions create negative ones. But more importantly, unconscious actions, those done without awareness, tend to bind us to cycles of suffering and repetition. This is why spiritual traditions across the world emphasize self-awareness, conscious living, and ethical behavior. Not because they're trying to control people, but because they understand that freedom comes through responsibility. Let's explore how this plays out in daily life. Every time you react instead of respond, you create karma. Every time you speak harshly out of frustration, you reinforce a pattern. Every time you act out of fear rather than love, you set into motion a chain of events that will return to you in some form. But here's the good news. Karma is not destiny. It is not a prison sentence. It is feedback, a way for life to show you where you need to grow. And when you become aware of your patterns, you gain the power to change them. This is the essence of spiritual responsibility. Not blame, not guilt, but recognition that your life is shaped not only by what happens to you, but by how you respond. Jesus modeled this kind of awareness. When faced with betrayal, he chose forgiveness. When insulted, he remained calm. When threatened with death, he responded with peace. He didn't deny pain. He simply refused to be controlled by it. That is the difference between being a victim of karma and becoming its master. Victims believe they have no choice. Masters recognize that, even in difficult circumstances, they can choose their response. Now, let's look at how you can begin to work with the law of cause and effect in your own life. 1. Become aware of your patterns. Pay attention to recurring situations. Do you often feel misunderstood? Are you frequently in conflict with authority figures? Do certain types of relationships repeat themselves? These are signs of karmic loops, lessons that are waiting to be learned. 2. Take full ownership of your experience. This doesn't mean blaming yourself for everything that happens. It means recognizing that your perception shapes your reality. If you see enemies everywhere, you may be projecting unresolved inner conflict. If you constantly attract chaos, you may be resisting inner stillness. 3. Respond consciously. Instead of reacting automatically, pause. Ask yourself, what is the higher path here? How can I respond from wisdom rather than fear? Even small shifts in reaction can break long-standing cycles. 4. Practice compassion. When you see someone who triggers you, remember, they are reflecting something within you. That doesn't excuse harmful behavior, but it does offer insight. Use these moments to heal old wounds rather than reinforce them. 5. Let go of grudges. Holding on to resentment is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It frees you from carrying its weight. As you begin to live with greater awareness, you'll notice something remarkable. Your life becomes lighter. You stop attracting unnecessary drama. You find peace in the midst of chaos. You start seeing challenges not as punishments, but as opportunities. Because the law of cause and effect isn't meant to trap you. It's meant to guide you home. It helps you refine your character, deepen your compassion, expand your awareness, and ultimately, it leads you back to the Christ consciousness, the place inside where you are free from all limitation. Because when you live from alignment, from love, from truth, you align with the highest flow of life. You stop creating karma, and you begin creating grace. Conclusion. the call to awakening. We have traveled together through the hidden metaphysical truths behind the teachings of Christ, not as dogma, not as religious doctrine, but as a living path of inner transformation. Along the way, we have explored the Christ consciousness within every human being, the symbolic meaning of death and rebirth, the illusion of separation, the power of forgiveness, the nature of divine love, and the role of the ego. We have seen how Jesus' words and actions were not just moral lessons or historical events, but encoded wisdom meant to awaken us to our own divinity. We have examined why many churches teach about Christ without truly embodying his message, and we have uncovered the deeper spiritual principles that lie beneath the surface of tradition. Now, at the end of this journey, let's return to the beginning, to the simple yet profound truth that has been present all along. You are not separate from the source of life. You are not broken. You do not need to earn love, salvation, or enlightenment. The kingdom of heaven is not waiting for you after death. It is already within you now. This book was never meant to convert you to a new belief system. It was meant to remind you of what you already know, deep inside, that there is something sacred within you, something eternal, something whole. Awakening is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you have always been. It is about recognizing the light within you and allowing it to shine without apology. It is about living with integrity, compassion, and courage, not because you must, but because you choose to. And most importantly, it is about stepping fully into your own spiritual authority, trusting your inner knowing, listening to the quiet voice within that speaks in whispers, not shouts, that guides you not through fear, but through love. Because the Christ consciousness is not confined to any one person, time, or place. It is the birthright of every human being, and it is available to you right now, no matter where you are on your journey.